welcome to all our listeners. Today, we're very fortunate to have a really cool guest, the economist Dr. Michael Danquah from the World Institute for Development Economics Research at the United Nations University in Helsinki, Finland. So before we get started, let me give you a bit of background about Michael. I mean, quite an impressive educational background. You did your bachelor's honors in economics at the University of Ghana in Accra, then moved to Senegal to do your master's in economics at the UN African Institute for Economic Development and Planning. And you completed your PhD in economics at the Swansea University in Wales in the UK. You've also have some work experience. I think between your master's and PhD, you were a policy analyst for the National Development Planning Commission in Accra for 2 years. Then after your PhD, you were lecturer at the Ghana Institute for Management and Public Administration for 2 years before moving to the University of Ghana in Accra for 5 years. And then you've recently, in 2019, moved into your current position as a research fellow at the United Nations University in Helsinki, Finland. You're also a research associate with a couple other projects. I have the International Growth Center at the London School of Economics, and also the transfer project from the UNICEF in Florence, Italy. So I hope I didn't leave anything important out. This is a very
It's fine, yeah.
very interesting and fascinating background. So let's move to our main discussion. So the discussion will center around the theme of human capital, innovation, and technology adoption in sub-Saharan Africa. So today we'll be looking really at one region in particular, which is sub-Saharan Africa. So I've divided the interview into two sections. The first one will be looking at human capital, productivity growth. And in the second section, we'll be looking at human capital, technology, and this idea of national efficiency. So without further ado, let's get started with our first section, human capital and productivity growth. So you have, Michael, you have written several articles with other colleagues on the effect of human capital and productivity growth. So just for the sake of clarity for our non-economist listeners, could you before we get started, briefly describe what these two concepts mean in the context of your research? So, for example, if we get started with human capital.
All right. So, human capital embodies the knowledge and the skills of the active population. So, given a country, we are looking at the capability of the working population, here. Here we're looking at the skills and that of the knowledge of the population. With respect to sub-Saharan Africa, a couple of things come out, which is good we talk about now. So there are different levels of human capital, right? So there are actually lower levels, which we may call unskilled, and then there are also higher levels, which we may call skilled human capital. With respect to sub-Saharan Africa, we would say that the majority of the population are unskilled. What do we mean by that? We mean that they have lower educational attainment. They have only a primary school education and not a secondary, no, a tertiary education. So in the context of the research and for sub-Saharan Africa, this is what it means.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's great. So you really it's really about the individual's knowledge, skill, like experience that kind of make them probably more productive. We'll get to that discussion. Excellent. And what about the concept of productivity growth? What exactly do you mean by that in your research?
So if we talk about productivity growth, we are looking at output per worker. So let me break it down. So in order for you to embark on any activity, yes, you need labor, right? And you need the capital and the equipment that would go into it. And so what actually happens is that if you combine all this, you get an output. So we are looking at how much output do you have given this input. So it is basically your outputs per the inputs that you put into a particular production process.
Okay. And I think also in your research, you also kind of separate this concept of productivity growth into two components. You talk about technical change, which we could commonly call innovation, and efficiency change, which is more commonly called also the adoption of technology. So do you want to talk a little bit about why it might be interesting to look at it from these two angles?
Good. So it is interesting to do this based on the issue of policy. Policy is much better, or you are able to have a good policy when you are able to break down the things you want to talk about. So yes, we have productivity, which is one big term, but we would have to break it down so that it will be easier in terms of the policy maker trying to, come up with an appropriate policy in this case. So if we talk about technical change, what technical change means, just as you said, is innovation, is the ability to produce new things. All right, in this case, and then the efficiency change is how best one is able to adopt and adapt this new technology that is there. So we look at it from both sides. If you are able to have a new technology, if you innovate, yes, it leads to productivity. It leads to an increase in the output per worker. In the same way, if you are able to also adapt the new technology, adopt it well, you are also able to, enhance the output per worker as well. So these two things would combine to be able to increase your, productivity. What actually happens is this: if one stays stagnant and the other increases, you are able to increase your productivity as well. If both increase, you are able to increase. But if one goes up and the other goes down, you will not be able to, increase it. So it is good to have a very good understanding of how these two components work.
Well, this is very interesting because this is kind of a trend that we see. In one of your most recent articles, you show the trends between 1960 and 2010 on innovation and adoption of technology in sub-Saharan Africa. And you find that there has been a 0.08% decline in innovation between 1960 and 2010. But a 1.7% increase in the adoption of technology. these numbers seem very small for 50 years. Like, how do you make sense of these numbers? How do you explain these numbers?
Good. That's a good one. So it's quite clear that over the years, sub-Saharan African countries have been able to adopt and adapt some technology that is coming from the world technology frontier. So mobile phones and all the other things. Why is it so? This level of adaptation has been so because of certain factors. You would talk about what is called the transmission mechanisms here. So yes, we would later talk about human capital. The level of human capital, as I have said, is mainly unskilled. And for the issue of adoption and adaptation, you do not require a highly skilled human capital for this. So yes, there's been that ability for sub-Saharan African countries to what you call it, adapt in this case. There are other factors like the institutions, like the macroeconomic stability and all the other things. What has happened is that there is some level of adopting, but it has not been good over the past 5 decades. This is what it tells you that there is some improvement, but they are not too good here. And then on the other hand, in terms of innovation, we are retrogressing. So there is what is called a technical regress. So we are actually going back in terms of the ability to do new things. But why is it so? As we would see, innovation is done by skilled workers. So it's when you have a skilled human capital, a certain level of that you are able to innovate. And clearly sub-Saharan Africa doesn't have that. If you look at, I think the World Development Indicators has some numbers in terms of the number of what you call the patents across the world. The numbers there are almost zero for sub-Saharan Africa. So this is what it tells us. There's been a bit of push in terms of adopting new technology here, but it's been very, very slow. But also in terms of the innovation bit, we haven't done well at all. We actually going back. So one could gauge in terms of policy, given even this to a policy maker has a lot to do in terms of the way forward.
So what would be the policy implication of these findings? What do you think policymakers should be focusing on?
So this is a very good one. Productivity is very, very, important. I mean, Nobel Prize laureate Paul, Krugman said productivity is not everything, but in the long run, it is everything. Productivity is key for the growth and development of any country. So if countries want to develop, it would have to look at how best it can boost its productivity growth. And this results are a very clear finding. These are the levels. Just as I did say earlier, the margins of efficiency change are very, very small. whilst there is actually a decline in the innovation, what it tells us is that we're not going anywhere in terms of growth and the development. We're not going anywhere. Even if the innovation was at a standstill, and we have seen some marginal increases in the efficiency scores, then we will say that we are making some progress. But here, it's more of a minus and it's more of a plus, what is actually a minus. All right. So we know. So we should, policy makers would need to make a good attempt in trying to, with regards to these papers, countries must work at trying to lift up the level of human capital. And this sends a very strong signal here. What actually happens for many sub-Saharan African countries is that there are many things they have to do. They have to provide roads, they have to do that. So there are myriad of things they have to do. So this paper sends a very clear signal that, look, there are many other things you would have to do, but it would be great if you can prioritize education, higher education, because this would help with your productivity, which is a vital engine for growth and development. And I can see that some countries, I cannot tell whether it's from this research, but there's been a massive push in educating people. I give you one example for Ghana. Ghana now has a free senior high school. So if you want to go to the secondary school, it is free. It has not been free. So what actually happens is that people finish the primary and they drop out because of funds to be able to go. But the government has invested so much, and now secondary school is free. So if you are done with your what do you call it, primary school, you can go to the secondary school, which is free. So these are all attempts at trying to boost the skilled labor force that we do have. Why? Because in a way, policy makers understand that this can be vital for productivity growth and to a larger extent growth and the development.
Oh, that's really interesting. Especially bringing the example of Ghana. When did it change that they put the secondary school free? Is it quite recent or?
Yes. So this is quite recent. It might have happened some 2 years ago somewhere.
Okay. Yeah, no, definitely very interesting what's happening at the moment. So if we switch gear and go to the second topic where we look more really at the country scale, at the link between human capital, technology, and national efficiency. So in one of your recent papers, you look at technology transfer, adoption of technology, and this idea of efficiency of nation. So in that paper, you define national efficiency as, quote unquote, the process whereby an economy is able to adopt and adapt already existing technology from world technology leaders and successfully apply it domestically. So in this paper, you use this concept of national efficiency and you compile a national efficiency score for 18 sub-Saharan African countries. So for our listeners, could you just briefly explain how this metric, this efficiency score is calculated?
Good. So what we do is this. There is the attempt to look at the potential output of all these countries given their inputs. And then we compare the potential output of these countries to that of their actual output. Let me go over this again. So for every country, all these countries, they produce an output. You would call it GDP, or the gross domestic. So all of them produce an output. What goes into this output? What goes into this output is their physical capital stock, which is their machinery and their equipment and the factories, and then the people who work in there. So they put all this together. We call them inputs, and these inputs give us an output. So we use a metric called the stochastic frontier analysis. And what it would do is that it is able to tell us the potential output for all these countries, and then the potential output to that of their actual output. And so the difference between their potential output and their actual output is their efficiency. Please, I hope I'm clear.
Oh, I think you're very clear. I think you did a great job explaining that. So it's really this idea that we know the inputs. Technically, these inputs should give us this output, but what do we really observe? And then we get this score depending on that difference. So that's really great. And if we go into really having specific examples, looking at these countries, out of these 18 countries, we see very stark differences between the efficiency scores of the top three countries, which are Mauritius, 97%, Kenya, 95%, and Ghana at 67%. And the bottom three countries, which are Mozambique, 25%, Malawi, 23%, and Niger, 22%. So we have some countries who are at 97%, and others were at like around 20%. So how do you explain these differences, these stark differences between these countries?
Good. So one word would be that those at the top are combining their inputs efficiently, all right, to get the output, while the others below are not doing that. So the big issue is, what are the obstacles? What is aiding these top countries to be able to combine their inputs to get this output efficiently? And what is obstructing the countries below in terms of combining their inputs? So a couple of things would come to play here. And again, is the issue of institutions. So if you have a country where you have a very good institutions, you have a very good banking system, what do you call it, a thriving private sector, and all that, what happens is that they are able to work efficiently, and they are able to generate as much as, So the output we are talking about comes from within these countries. So it's about how these countries within them combine all this. And then also we can bring in the issue of human capital again. If you have a country that have very low human capital, what happens is that you may have all the equipment and the computers, but you're not able to use it efficiently. And that may be a drawback for you. There is also a big issue of what is called internal R&D. So for every country, one would expect that there's at least a level of some research and development within the country. These research and development, the private sector can tap into it, they could provide valuable resources to the private sector, to the service sector, and to all these other. So there are actually factors that are inhibiting these countries below.
I see that we're slowly running out of time, but maybe to end, it's maybe a bit speculative, but still, I'd be really curious to hear your opinion about sub-Saharan Africa is a very rapidly evolving region. We saw that in the 50 years from 1960 to 2010, innovation regressed, but technology adoption moderately increased. If you had to guess, do you expect this trend to continue? For example, if we think about the next few decades, and if you have an opinion, maybe explain why.
So one thing that it is difficult to do is to put them all together. If we put them all together, one will not expect to see any much changes going forward. But I think that certain countries like Senegal, like Ghana, and certain countries are taking some new steps. Certain countries are aware of some of these things, and going forward, if they go ahead with what they are doing, they can turn things around. So there are some exceptions there, which will not, experience this regress all the time. But to a larger extent, if we lump them together, I don't think that these few countries can, can disrupt this. And so, I mean, one thing we do all the time, and we say that averages are a bit deceptive, right? So if you take the average, you don't have a very good picture. But certainly, if we take them country by country, countries like Kenya or Mauritius or Ghana definitely would make a very good headway in terms of improving their, human capital.
That's really interesting, and yeah, thank you for giving so many examples of countries. Like, it's just really the outlook we should have is to look at individual countries, since I mean, sub-Saharan Africa is such a big region. There's such a great diversity and disparity of countries in terms of their own situation. Excellent. Well, Michael, thank you so much for taking the time to answer all our questions today. I mean, I think it was a very enlightening talk about a region that, as you write often in your paper, is often not researched that much when it comes to these topics. So that covers this podcast. So thank you to all our listeners. Thank you to Michael again. And hopefully we'll see you in our next potential podcast someday. Who knows?
Right. Excellent. Many thanks.